Oh no. Out of breath. Okay. Okay. Hello! I'm Jenny Ferd and welcome to my library. Today we are going to do the mid-year book freakout tag. I saw a video from Emmy and I thought I would participate. I have tried my best to answer these questions and I have a huge stack of books on my lap right now and I think we should just get started. So to kind of summarize my reading year for the first half of the year, I read 109 books, I think, but that includes shorter stuff that I don't know, other people might not count. I had a goal of 70 and clearly we're already over that for the whole year. So the first question is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? So I'm just going to show you some of my 5-star reads so that you can get an idea of what they are and what I'm looking at in terms of picking the best book so far this year. And I'm not really going to tell you anything about them or my thoughts about them. I'm just going to show them real quick. So we have Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis, Walls and Bars by Eugene V. Debs, Doomsday Book by Connie Willis, The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe, Planetfall by Emma Newman, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, Sourdough by Robin Sloan, Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. My cat is trying to play with my dog right now and she's really upset about it. And Orange World by Karen Russell. So with those as my main contenders, my pick for this question is going to be The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. I only have the first volume. I'm hoping to get more or, ideally all of them at some point. But for now, this is what we have. I read this through my library and then I had to purchase some of the later volumes that my library did not have in order to finish out the series. Why did I pick this as my favorite book for this year? Well, somewhat I'm cheating because it is an entire manga series. I picked this because it really helped me through a time where I was just really not happy. I was very sad and I felt like I could cry at any moment for 2 months or 3 months or something. So I was struggling and this has like light and darkness. There's really bleak themes in this book, but there's also hope and really bright spots. So it helped me. It made me really happy, basically, when I read it. It is about a sickness that affects like a medieval kind of town, and it turns people into these creatures that can infect others by touch. So one of these beasts finds a young girl outside of the protected city walls and she seems to be fine, and so he's trying to protect her from becoming cursed. The other thing I love so much about this series is the artwork. It is really, really impactful. The little girl, she is so cute in this story. She is just a ray of sunshine, and the artwork generally is really impactful in its use of negative space, and it gives a lot of breathing room for moments, which I appreciate. So the next question is about which sequel or continuation of a series has been my favorite so far this year. So I haven't read that many series this year. I started reading Witch Hat Atelier, which I really enjoyed, and I haven't continued on with the series after a certain point because my library doesn't have the books and I haven't bought them. So those books are really, really solid. The artwork and the style is great and the story is fun. I've already talked about The Girl on the Other Side, so I don't think we need to discuss that because that would probably fit this prompt. The other book series that I've read is The Themis Files. I read 2 of the books from that series. And I also read the 2 books that follow Planet Fall by Emma Newman, which was one of my favorite books. But the 2 subsequent books I didn't really like that much. I'm gonna go with a bit of a weird one. This year I read a bunch of the Laura Ingalls Wilder like Little House books. I don't have all of them. I don't actually have Little House on the Prairie, but Little House in the Big Woods was one of my favorite books when I was in like 3rd grade. It was really influential to me and it really made me like want to write, and I just like copied the writing in that book. The series overall, I have like differences of opinion on some of the things, or a lot of the things, like some of like the morals and the thought processes I just don't agree with. So one of the books from this series that I enjoyed was On the Banks of Plum Creek. The very first half of it, where Laura is a little bit more wild, she's running around enjoying nature. That's what I love the most and what I look forward to the most in reading these stories. The other story that I really appreciated was The Long Winter, which was about a winter that had a very intense series of blizzards, and it lasted for a really long time. And I also just really appreciated that book. So the next question is there a new release that you haven't read but you're really excited about? This one is a bit hard for me because that's not really the type of reader I am. I'm not like constantly looking for new releases. I'm not always trying to read the newest stuff. I'm usually looking at, you know, what's available at my library, which, you know, sometimes is new releases. And then looking at the thrift store to see what piques my interest there. Really the only book that fits into this category for me is The Mountain and the Sea, which I must have heard somewhere, maybe on like a list, like an email list of books to look out for, or somebody was speaking about new releases. This was released in October 2022, I believe. It is about the discovery of intelligent life in a species of octopus, repercussions of that discovery. So this species has like language and culture that we identify and appreciate as intelligent life. I should mention this is by Ray Naylor, but other than that, I don't really know that much about it. It just sounded like something that I would be interested in, so I have it on hold at the library. I put a request in, so hopefully I'll be able to read it this year. The next question is, what has been my biggest disappointment so far this year? My biggest reading disappointment of the year has been House of Rust. So I heard a description of this book from Shaylin Writes, when she was doing one of her reading wrap-up type videos, and it just sounded really cool. It's about a girl who is trying to find her father who's been lost at sea, and she has a boat, like a magical boat made of bones, and she's accompanied by a talking cat. I feel like I remember Shaylin saying that it had that element of like magicalness that middle grade sometimes does, but that it was intended for adults. And that sounded really compelling to me because I do really appreciate middle grade books for what they bring to the imagination. Everything about it from the summary sounded really lovely, but I just didn't connect with this book. I found many moments of the dialogue to be tedious and over emotional and repetitive, and just it was just a little bit confusing. I just wanted it to be over, basically. The next question is, what has been the biggest surprise with regards to reading for this year? So I have 2 for this. and they're both a bit odd. One is that I was able to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in Spanish through an audiobook. I was able to understand what was happening, enjoy it, and really get immersed into the story. I haven't studied Spanish for years. It's been like 12 years. And I haven't really consumed that much in Spanish since then either. So I was pretty surprised that I was able to listen to this and be really engaged in it and understand what was happening. And even as I was reading the book, or just after, I then started to have dreams where I was speaking Spanish. So I think I'm going to try to continue to reread some of the middle grade books that I'd read in English and read them in Spanish. So I was thinking next I might do a series of unfortunate events, and that might be a fun way to reread that series. The second big surprise for me was that this book here, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, was a nonfiction piece. I thought while I was reading this that this was a novel, and I think after I finished reading it, or maybe just before I finished reading it, I found out that it was nonfiction. So I quite enjoyed this story. I really thought that it was an interesting collection of interactions, I guess I would say. But I had no idea that this was real people and real events, and I wouldn't have chosen to read basically a true crime story about a murder. If I had known, I wouldn't have read this, because I have my own moral dilemmas with consuming that type of media. Also, when I was reading this, I didn't realize that it would contain a murder, and so that was a little bit surprising as well. So in the end, when I realized that it was a true story, I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I immediately gave the book 3 stars, even though I did enjoy it so much, because of that shock. And then when I reflected on it more, I was like, well, I can't stop thinking about this. I was so immersed in this world. I give it 4 stars. And I think honestly it might have been a 5-star read. I just was a little bit upset that this was a real story. So the next question is my favorite new author. So that would either be a debut author or somebody who I've just begun reading this year. So I'm gonna pick somebody I just started to read, and that is Robin Sloan. I read this book, Sourdough, and Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, and I really enjoyed both of them. What I like about Robin Sloan's writing is the bizarreness mixed with the modernness, that they don't take themselves too seriously. They're still like light reads, and they don't really force an issue to be like discussed or dissected. There might be something in the background that you can think about on your own time, but the story isn't going to dive into it. So I do look forward to reading more work by Robin Sloan. So this question is, newest fictional crush? Which I don't even think about that when I'm reading. Like, I don't even think I would read something that would like allow me to have a fictional crush. I don't really know how to answer this. The only thing I can think of that would somewhat answer this question is the main character Kvothe in The Name of the Wind, because I cared so much for him, but I cared for him in the way like I would care for like a nephew. So the next question is favorite character. And I think my favorite character that I've read so far this year is Ren from Planet Fall. She is a 3D print engineer on a space colony, and she has some unresolved issues. I just thought she was a very fully fleshed out three-dimensional character, at least in my opinion. She's a 3D printing engineer, which I quite liked because I am an engineer in the manufacturing industry. And she also struggled with hoarding, which I quite enjoyed the idea of a character who relies on the recycling of materials for her job, and yet she can't bring herself to do that. I thought that was an interesting aspect to her character, which helped the story. Oh, my little doggy. My little doggy. Clover. She really wanted to be up here. Then, the next question is, a book that made me cry. This, I feel like in any given year, this would just not happen. But this year, I actually did have very emotionally invested stakes in The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I was so invested in the health and safety of our main boy that anytime he had like a really good win, I was there for him. Anytime he was in deep jeopardy, I was also there for him. But I feel like the moments that I was like so emotionally invested, like on the verge of tears, was when he could be on the verge of losing everything and things go his way. Anytime he had just a slight win when he could have been right on the precipice of complete destruction, I was so invested in his well-being that it brought me close to tears. Book that made me happy. So the next is a book that made me happy. I've already talked about how happy The Girl from the Other Side made me, so I'm going to talk about Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis. I wanted to read this book for a really long time. I thought the cover was so compelling. This was one of those books that I was like, you know what? Someday I'm going to read this and I think I'm going to love it. And I just put it off for a long time, and this year I finally got to it, and it was true. I did love this. I thought this was a really, really compelling book. Right up my alley in terms of what I enjoy in older works of fiction. And it's funny that sometimes even when I really, really love a book, it can just fall completely out of my mind. So I'll be so happy in the experience of reading, and then almost immediately after, all memory of the book just falls away. So I don't really remember that much about it, but I really enjoyed the process of reading it. The next question is most beautiful book. The most beautiful book that I've acquired this year is this copy of The Wind in the Willows. I adore The Wind in the Willows. It's one of my favorite books, and for the longest time I only had it as a digital copy, like a public domain digital copy book. And now I'm so happy to have this with its really beautiful gold foil and just the really lovely illustrations. The texture of the book is really lovely, and the back of the book is also really lovely. So I'm really thrilled to have this. And I think this is the last question. What do I want to read by the end of the year? So I have a few books that I want to read, and most of them are things that I want to finish reading because I don't really know what kind of mood I'm going to be in like a few weeks from now. So one is Live from Death Row by Mumia Abu-Jamal. Then there's The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and Fanny Flagg's Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. I would also really like to finish reading The Birch Bark House by Louise Erdrich. and The Silent Deep, which is about the ocean, by Tony Koslow. And those are the questions for this tag. I've made it through. Can you believe it? Like, what are your top 3 books that you've read this year? I would love to hear about that. I don't think we have time or the battery life to do an oddly specific book recommendation today. But you can also leave recommendations for what you would like to hear for a book recommendation in the comments, and I would be happy to get to that. But for now, that's it. We're done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.